now are censored, and I'm very much looking forward to hear more about all these problems from my fellow panelists. And first of all, Didi Kirsten Tatlow is going to talk about China and the media, and with a special focus on the disinformation campaigns or general disinformation by the CCP in China, by the Communist Party in China. That's her focus. And you have met her this morning as a host. She very modestly hasn't talked too much about herself. She's a very experienced journalist, has been working for South China Morning Post, for New York Times and other very renowned media. And now she is a fellow member or fellow researcher for the Asian program, of the German Society for German Council on Foreign Relations. Yeah, sorry, not Society, Council. Sorry. No. Okay, so first of all, I give the word to you.
Thank you very much, Sabine. After I was so streng, so harsh with everyone earlier on the Hong Kong panel, I do apologize. I'll try not to take up too much time myself. It would hardly be fair. So 10 minutes, is that okay, or 7 or 5?
10 is okay, we have an hour.
Okay, I'm really lucky then, all right.
Already 20 minutes.
Okay, all right, well, everyone's, okay. Also, I'll stick to English. It's a little difficult to otherwise create verbal clarity. I'll also try to not rush my words. I think I want to talk about the media, but to talk about what the control by the Communist Party of the domestic media means outside of China, means for the outside world. So here, it's very clear, an increasing amount of study is being done into how the party controls media outside of the borders of the People's Republic of China. And, why do they do that? Well, it's obvious, in order to hold overseas Chinese close to the party, to shape the conversation about China everywhere in the world, and to create a kind of sense, I think, everywhere in the world among people who speak Chinese or are aware of the party's presence through the media it controls in the world, to give a sense that the party's always there. It's somewhere, it's a threat, actually. It's kind of hanging over you one way or the other, so you can never quite forget. At this point, it seems that just about the only actually non-Communist Party media in Chinese in the world would be the Falun Gong newspaper. Epoch Times, I think it's the only one that has survived. Because starting around the early 90s, there used to be quite a flourishing, diverse Chinese language media scene in other places, including in Europe. These have all gradually been taken over by Communist Party interests or editors. I think you will all know that. Just 2 days ago, I went to Go Asia supermarket in Charlottenburg. And what did they have at the checkout? They have 欧洲时报. So we know what is 欧洲时报. It's headquartered in Paris. It claims to have 5 branches across Europe, including in Germany. And it's essentially set up by the Chinese embassy in Paris in 1983, I think it was. Essentially, the Chinese embassy in Paris approached a well-known ethnic Chinese person from Hong Kong to become the first editor-in-chief of this new Chinese language media in Europe. he actually declined it, but this is how we know, and this is a personal reporting of mine, that this is how we know that in fact the 欧洲时报 origins are in the Chinese embassy of Paris. You know, so I think you'll all be familiar with how the overseas Chinese communities have, I think, lost these media voices. And you could say, well, they're newspapers, so they're not so important. You know, everything's online, but of course they all have their online editions, and there are very, very many social media, all kinds of websites. dolc.de is one of the most influential in Germany, for example. Ktrip.com, originally a travel company set up by a overseas student from China who studied in Munich. Now that website now hosts the German language overseas 人民日报, People's Daily edition. So you see how it just sort of grows and grows like that. And I think what I wanted to focus on here is that increasingly people are studying the role of the 统战部, the United Front, in building these overseas networks of Chinese language media or Communist Party connected or owned media in foreign languages like German, English, French, Romanian, even, you know, Czech, Russian. And this is a really interesting question because it seems to me that researchers such as myself who study, you know, 统一战线工作部, you know, the work of the United Front, are very aware of its presence and how it operates overseas. But it's often my sense that actual Chinese communities overseas may not be quite so aware of it. And this is a little bit of paradox that I would, please correct me if my impression is wrong, but it's a paradox that I would love to explore a bit more. I think it has to do with embeddedness, with personal relations, also, you know, with maybe how the language works. It's complex, but definitely more and more attention is going toward really objectively studying the impact of this 统战部 media through the 叫什么呀侨联, the Overseas Chinese Association, and all there. You know, there are at least 3 major forums where Communist Party owned or connected media, often through a company like Guanghua Media in Paris, or there are similar companies in Germany, that they gather all the 就侵华, so China-friendly Communist Party sponsored media overseas in Europe, where they gather them for 3 meetings, and they're called things like, you know, 世界华文传媒什么什么呀, you know, there's always slight variations on the names. There are at least 3 of them. 2 of them take place in China every alternate year, and 1 takes place in Europe. And then, you know, you always see the same networks of people. And as we know, I think it was in 2018, the Qiaolian moved from being, it moved into the, actually directly under the control of the, if I've remembered this correctly, of the 统一战线工作部. So basically it's become a much more core, I mean, it was always with United Front, but it's become a much more core organization. And we see Xi Jinping himself and all kinds of other officials constantly talking about the importance of Qiaolian and the 统战部工作 for creating ideological control outside of China, pressuring people from China and other people outside of China, etc. It's really clear. I think the number in Germany that I've counted was that we had about 12 specific Chinese language and non-Chinese language media, and then they have offshoots, social media platforms. So you have dozens and dozens at some point operating in Germany, and about 100 across Europe. So we're really talking quite large numbers, and I think, you know, we need to think about this as a form of political warfare. We really do need to think about this as a form of political warfare. And, you know, for a long time, I think people haven't. We've been rather naive. Well, we've been extremely naive. but we need to make that switch towards looking at it. And I think that's difficult, particularly if you're from a, overseas Chinese community, because there are many personal contacts and ties, and it makes the picture very complicated. I understand that. So just to finish, one thing then about one problem we have with China, with disinformation, actual disinformation coming from Beijing. We saw it all with COVID. We see it with all these times messaging. We know that the political system in China was involved in supporting the Black Lives Matter movement in the United States, basically sowing sort of anger, disagreement, criticism, dissatisfaction. ASPI in Australia did a very good paper about that, proving it. And, just basically supporting saying Black Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter, that's the police, wherever, just piling in and just making everyone really angry. So that's of course another tactic of political warfare. You create anger. The problem we have in Europe is that the European Union is weak on dealing with this. We have something in Brussels called the East Stratcom, and East, which means East Strategic Communications Task Force. And this is under the EEAS, the European External Action Service. The problem is that East, for them, East means Russia. It doesn't go further east, particularly. I mean, they do have now maybe 2.5 experts on China. They've just added one person, but this person, as far as I understand, is an expert on North Korea. And so we are massively understaffed when it comes to, massively badly prepared when it comes to actually identifying, proving, and combating disinformation from Beijing as it's affecting our democracies in Europe, and is in fact a real challenge to our own democratic security, as I call it. Josep Borrell, the head of the EEAS, says that the EEAS has no remit or money to do more. They have 11 million, I think it's 11 million euros a year. I know that someone gave me 11 million euros. I could think of quite a lot of things to do. So that's a political argument. But I just wanted to stop there. I'm sure I've gone on too long. Thank you.
Is it okay if we continue is it okay for us to continue in English? Yes? Okay. So I'll introduce. You're going to speak in Chinese or no English? Yeah. Yeah. You, how many people do not understand English, if I may ask? 不懂英语，但是前期没有注意，他们没有太注意。你自己来啊？
其实要吗？哎呦，这2-3句总结，好吧？就大概的就说这个国外华侨那个社会，现在很长时间了，就是有一定的变化，就在媒体这方面哈，以前独立媒体比较多，各种各样的那个看法是不是啊？然后意见，大概就天安门广场就是沙漠之后。屠杀之后，对不起，就开始了，怎么说，就和谐化，是不是啊？90年代中，现在到目前为止啊，你去什么中国市场就是买东西呢，你看到什么报纸，差不多都是那个《欧洲时报》。《欧洲时报》是巴黎那边那个大使馆，基本上是成立的。它是一个非常有政治的一个看法的一个报纸哈。然后它是主要是这个在欧洲，然后一共算起来12个德国华文媒体或是翻译成德语的那个中国就是中共媒体，大概有12个在德国，在整个欧洲大概有100个。左右，现在除了法轮功那个 Epoch Times 之外，哈，几乎没有这个反对的声音。 这是第一点。第二点是那个我们应该就是把这个就是控制中国人的那个声音的那个情况，就是中共控制中国人在欧洲或者是在国外所有地方的声音哈，就是通过媒体就是控制这种声音的，把这个就是明白，就是怎么明白，就是说它是政治的那个战争的一块儿。因为这就是习近平自己，哎，怎么了？啊，是习近平自己这么理解的。我觉得这是一个很长的一个传统，在中国大陆，在中共的那个历史上啊。然后我们现在就是差不多就是不在乎这个，或者我们是不是以这个方式来看这个媒体，所以我觉得我们就是需要有一定的那个重新的考虑，重新看这个然后就是最后就是说这个欧盟呢。他不够理解和那个反对这个现象啊，因为他说我们所有的那个 disinformation 就是假新闻哈，中共出的假新闻等等，包括就是通过他们那个外交官啊，或是官方媒体，说这个他们主要关的是那个俄罗斯啊，觉得中国不是欧洲的事，所以他们工作人员非常少，大概有2个。好。
Jetzt sind wir natürlich mit der Zeit doch etwas ins Hintertreffen geraten. Oh, I'm sorry. So right now we're definitely outside of our time frame. So I'll very shortly introduce Marie Holzman, who is a professor who came to us from Bali, from Paris, and I guess most of you know her. She published many work of the opposition, Chinese opposition, and she is going to talk about China's media strategy. Please.
Well, hello everybody. I'll also make a short resume in Chinese when I stop. I'm going to follow on Didi and give some examples for France in particular, because I guess none of you have lived in France except Liu Yimin in front of me. So maybe it would interest you more to know exactly how it went on in France. In France in 1989, as you know, many Chinese dissidents arrived in Paris, and it became a very lively scene for the Chinese democratic movement. So information about the opposition, about the quest for democracy, and the projects of the various participants who had arrived in China, in France, sorry, from China, were very active in the universities, in the French press, everywhere. And right after the Tiananmen massacre, practically at the beginning of the year 1990, the French government created a special radio program for the Radio France International big house. There came a Chinese program like VOA or like BBC in China. And that program, in my sense, had a tremendous impact on the Chinese community in France, because they heard the French position on whatever was happening. I mean, whether it was France or America or Turkey or whatever, and China. And of course, because most of the people who had joined that group were ancient dissidents and still active, of course, they were very careful to talk about what was happening in China, violating Chinese human rights. And I'll make that story short because we don't have much time. Unfortunately, at the end of the 90s, beginning of the 2000s, the French government decided that it wasn't rich enough anymore, and that the Chinese program, after all, was only listened to by, I don't know, let's say 15 million Chinese, but maybe it was 100 million, who knows? It was practically impossible to know how many Chinese were listening to it because it went through shortwave. But for me in Paris, what was important is that we could listen to it 1 hour every day. It was either 10 to 11 or 11 to 12, depending summer and winter time. And wherever you went at that time, every restaurants, kitchens, I mean, there are lots of kitchens, restaurants in Paris, Chinese kitchens, you could hear the news. And I remember one day queuing to go to the swimming pool, and the Chinese was behind me and had his real transistor, and he was listening to the news. And it was all about what was going on, who was arrested, which lawyer was in trouble, etc., etc. And suddenly that disappeared because it all went internet. And almost at the same time, you had a tremendous invasion of Chinese media, especially through TV, CCTV. So in every Chinese restaurant, that was absolutely unavoidable. You would sit there and you would be watching Chinese propaganda. So it became very tangible how it changed from one atmosphere to another atmosphere. On the other hand, Didi just talked about Ozhou Ribao. Well, we had in Paris Ozhou Ribao and Ozhou Shibao. So Ozhou Ribao was Taiwan oriented and was very interesting. I mean, it had a lot of information and it was pretty objective, let's say, not too much propaganda from the Taiwanese side. And we had Ozhou Shibao, and Ozhou Shibao was the Chinese Communist Party newspaper. So what the Chinese Communist Party did to Ozhou Ribao was very interesting. I think it was the same strategy as what it did to Far Eastern Economic Review. It was to dry up the publicity. So all of a sudden, Ozhou Ribao ended up with no publicity at all, because before it was all those restaurants, all those, I don't know, Qingdao Pijiu, I mean, all those people would put some money in Ozhou Ribao and it could function. But then there was no more gas, you know, and the car couldn't go on. So it simply stopped. And I think that was in the year 2004 or 2005, I don't remember. And then only the Chinese paper was there. And some people who could not find work, I'm always talking about the Chinese, who could not find work at Radio France International because they were also, you know, cutting down. Well, they started working in that other paper. But some of them still had in mind, you know, that we should be objective, we should talk about facts. So I'll give you a very short recent story. I won't give her name because I think she's very nervous about that. But a young journalist heard of what was going on in an African country, that the Chinese were doing the peanuts business. But they were doing it so well that all the peanuts went off to China, and there were no peanuts left in that African country. So she just described that. I mean, she wasn't putting any judgment on that. Well, her boss wanted to punish her and maybe to kick her out. So she got really scared. She asked all around, and some people talked to the boss and said she didn't realize it was really nothing, and it was all right. But you see, even in Paris, trying to give a relatively, not unimportant, it is important, but it wouldn't hurt anybody knowing that the Chinese were eating up all the peanuts. I mean, it's not good, but it's not actually arm business. So you see how the fear works in Paris, because we only have now in the Chinese community, as Didi said, Epoch Times is the only remaining influential newspaper that is not communist oriented, and we have Huarenzhie. So Huarenzhie is on internet, and Huarenzhie is doing, I believe, an awful lot of harm to the Chinese community because it's totally fake news. I'd say 80% is fake news. And I don't know why, but they want to put the Chinese community in a state of fear. So the fear is the disease. And everything we try to do and say is contradicted by the news in Ojo, whatever, 华人街, in 华人街. And I mean, I'll give you another example of disinformation that's rather amusing. You know, there were demonstrations in Cuba recently because they didn't have enough COVID shots and all that, and they went on the streets and they said, we have to take care of us. So that piece of news was put on the Chinese media in France and in China. But since most Chinese people don't speak Spanish, they couldn't hear what they were saying. And there was a Chinese comment saying, you see, the Cubans are demonstrating against American imperialism. So it was a total fake news, total invention. And the Chinese were very excited about that because, you know, there are problems in this world and America is not always welcome, etc. And they were saying, well, the Cubans, they're strong. They resist American imperialism.
Sorry, I have to cut you short.
Okay. So I'll just say it in two sentences in Chinese. 我刚才说的，我就描写这个变化。怎么过去在法国在巴黎可以听一些比较客观的消息。特别是有关中国人权或者在法国在发生什么等等，然后慢慢的那些客观的消息就失踪了，因为过去的那个欧洲日报就是比较倾向台湾就没有了，因为经济问题，然后其他的消息也没有了，这个法国国际广播电台的那个中文广播也消灭了，所以现在我的感觉是，巴黎的华人光听中共的话，因为或者他们看华人街，或者有一些具体的消息，哪里去买房子，或者有一些中国大使馆的这种宣传，我觉得这是一个很大的问题。刚才弟弟也说过，这个中共对巴黎的中国老百姓的影响是非常大。再说他们经常发一些假消息，发假消息的时候，所有的中国人都信。这个我跟弟弟一样，我不理解他们怎么能信，因为他们知道中共说的都是假话，但是毕竟是这样啊，有关系有朋友，他说什么我就信。好。
Thank you very much.
法国国际广播电台，它的中文部还有呢？哦，没有这个广播，有没有？就是电脑上，巴黎。电脑上还是不是手机？没有电视，网络没有电视，就是那个听是可以的 ，radio 是可以的。没有，
广播没有，
没有了。
Yeah. For
这个头条目前占了所有的华人的，他这个头条每天有很多的东西，这样比所有的媒体都厉害，跟今日头条是。
Yeah, this is, I mean, in times of the internet, Chinese propaganda is very easy to find and easy to I mean, you can see it and use it and follow it everywhere. Yeah, but it was very interesting what you said about Radio France Internationale, that you could hear it in Paris, because I worked in Deutsche Welle, in the last days of the shortwave radio, and you couldn't hear it in Germany. Yeah, that's, yeah, so. Okay, we will, in a slight change of program, we will move on to Anna Wang. And können Sie Anna Wang zuschalten?
Yes. Yes.
So, hello.
Hi, how are you? Good morning.
welcome to our panel. And could you be so kind as maybe not everyone knows you here. I mean, most people, of course, do, but I'm a bit short of information. I know you came from Qinghai originally, and you were are a very successful businesswoman. Now you live in Washington, and you have this a media company. Could you tell us a slight bit about yourself, and then go on to talk about propaganda and fake news from an American perspective?
Thank you for having me. I need, but I think I need a translator. I can speak Chinese language.
Excuse me, you can talk in Chinese if you want. Yeah, okay, maybe for most people here it's better. Whatever you choose.
OK， 谢谢各位嘉宾、各位女士。我今天很高兴有这样的机会跟大家一起探讨中共的意识形态。那么这个刚才感谢主持人让我对自己有一个简短的介绍。那么我曾经在中国大陆在西北的青海省工作和生活过。所以我对中国西北地区，对这个中国的藏族，对这个穆斯林，对维吾尔族有着深刻的认识和了解，因为我也比较有很多朋友。那么我同时也在北京经营一个做纪录片的文化公司，总对中国大陆的情况，尤其是北方是比较了解。那么我曾经在青海民族大学教了5年中共党史，我作为一个大学老师，我曾经我本人在大学的时候就是学习苏共党史，所以对共产党有着深刻的认识。那么大家知道，中共是一个意识形态至上的一个政党，所以意识形态呢是中共的生命线。那么中共的所谓意识形态就是思想控制、洗脑加宣传。用他们在统治中国，那么他过去的话来讲，就是二杆子统治。这个二杆子就是什么呢？笔杆子和枪杆子。所谓笔杆子就是说文化宣传，然后是枪杆子。那么换个角度的理解，就是进行宣传、洗脑和欺骗。如果你不听，那就是枪杆子，就是镇压。所以这长期以来是中共执政的2个基本的这个。这个概括，中国民间对他们形容用二杆子来形容是非常的非常鲜活。那么中共对这个媒体的控制，各位都知道，在中国大陆，那么曾经在习近平以前的这个30年呢，那么有一些放松，那么民间有一些像 WeChat 以及其他一些实录的这些空间，那么现在整个中国大陆的媒体全部都被统一起来。现在媒体在中国大陆完全都是党媒，没有国家媒体，全是党的媒体，这是第一。第二就是说，所有重大的这个国际国内的报道，就是中国政府现在统一就使用新华社通稿。就是过去在胡温时期，他可能各个媒体然后有自己的评论，有自己的报道，那么这个评论和报道之间他会有一些余地，但是现在所有的事情，重大事情全部只有一个声音，就是新华社通稿。那么在海外中文媒体呢，我从2018年2019年出办这个光传媒，那我有一种深刻的感受，就是说大家也就像大家说的，诚如刚才玛丽女士说的，就是说北美欧洲的华文媒体其实有一个很令人震惊的这个现象。我来美国以后我才发现，就是说在北美的这些媒体，那就中文媒体基本上你说几百家都有，大大小小的这种网络呀、视频呀，这些各个这个广播呀，基本上也都是被中共所控制。那么有些是他的这个直接投资的媒体， 比如说侨报，有些是它的参股和渗透控制的隐形控制的媒体。所以现在北美，你真正的能够找到一家能独立的，或者说比较亲民主的这样的媒体也不是很多。现在呢，我想会有一个很重要的现象，我也提醒大家注意，就是说，中共它是以意识形态起家的媒体，所以政党，所以对于中共来讲，宣传和永远是放在第一位，因为宣传就是它的生命线。如果不宣传，如老百姓就知道事实的话，那么他就统治不了了。所以宣传重要。那么这种宣传就包括假媒体，包括舆论控制，包括一切，所以它就包括洗脑。所以对他来讲，这个永远他不会放弃意识形态，他就不会放弃大外宣，不会放弃宣传。因为如果没有老百姓知道了，中国人民知道真相，那么共产党就没办法统治了。所以他非但不会放弃，他还会加强。那么现在刚才说到海外的，尤其北美地区的这个中文媒体基本上都是被中共影响和渗透控制。那么现在有一个最大的特点就是说自媒体。那么海外的自媒体，像比如说中国人比较关注的中文市场是推特和这个油管，就是 YouTube。这个有一个最新的变化，因为这些推特和这个新媒体呢，那么对于华人来讲一个比较活跃，另一个呢它是自己的媒体，那么它可以说一些真话，所以在推特和这个 YouTube 里边就比较活跃。因为这个它不需要共产党，它很难控制。但是最近一段时间有个最新的变化，就是说你可以在推特上感觉到中文的这个世界的变化，就是说你可以隐隐约约的看到它有一个统一的部署，就是有些人就是他们这些五毛，大家感觉到说五毛越来越多了，甚至他会在有一些假的账号，然后他用这些假的账号呢，他就跟到你的一些，比如说我们光传媒的这个推特，很多人会跟，然后比如说一些民主人士，他有很多的去给你去 follow 你，然后他就专门在你的推底下进行各种的这种诋毁呀，这种反驳呀，这个你会感觉到在推特市场上，就是目前会其实有一支逐渐隐现的大军，就是你说五毛。或者是应该说是我五毛这个用词，就是他们背后有分工有合作，比如哪些人跟哪些人，比如说哪些人盯这个王丹，比如哪些人盯这个魏晋生，哪些人盯杨建立，就是只要你发推，底下就是一大片的这种各种诋毁，所以并且他就除了对个人和机构的诋毁以外，他们对这种公共事务对进行一些所谓舆论引导，这个呢，我觉得西方社会应该明确意识到这个问题，因为你看着貌似个人的推特，其实它背后他们有统一，包括
excuse me if I'm for interrupting you. I'm really sorry, but we are very short of time. If you want to say like two maybe one or 2 minutes in English, what you just told us in Chinese. 他不会，那好。
OK， 就最后1分钟，我就是提醒大家，就是说这个关于对油管 YouTube 的这个关注，因为最近油管里头有很多的这个红色的自媒体，其实他们背后都有这个官方的这种被各种形式的支持。那么尤其是在军事频道，油管里边的军事频道基本上都是红色媒体。就是所以这些他就是通过各种形式对海外华人的这种华文市场，以除了洗脑以外，提供假信息，然后外宣，同时他引导话题，谢谢，非常荣幸。
谢谢你。Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your contribution. I'm really sorry we do not have time to discuss any of the aspects that have been touched this afternoon. So I'll hand the mic over to Liao Tianqi.
I just give me 1 minute. I close. No. We are already 2 o'clock. No, yes. 好，那个中共的这种宣传工作，其实一早期就开始，25000里长。好，那2 minutes。25000里长征就是一个 myth. This 25,000 miles long march is just a myth. 那个英国人已經調查了 ，this is just a lie. 所以中國共產黨從一開始就在說謊。So, das ist in ihr Gene. OK. 而且在30年代的时候，中共起家没有多久，就有很多的西方的，我们今天叫他们白左，但是当时的那个左派的一些 intellectuals 还有 journalist 记者，比如说 Edgar Snow 什么 Anna Louise Strong 还有 Agnes Smedley 这些人，他们都帮中共说话。也许不应该批评他们太厉害，因为那个时候中国的情况不一样，但是中共非常知道怎么样利用西方的人。The Chinese the CCP knows how to use the Western journalists and intellectuals to support them, to do their propaganda. 然后2009年，胡锦涛推出了这个大外宣。2009，胡锦涛 started with this grand propaganda strategy. He started, and he want to raise the so-called soft power of China, 提高中国的这个软实力。They throw 10 billions of US dollar, 450亿人民币 to do this kind of propaganda in abroad, 在外国。好，2016年那个 CCTV 他们有一个新的一个 branch 叫做 CGTN， 就是这个 China Global Television Network， 它现在是在全世界的，有在非洲、在美国、在欧洲都有总部。在 in Africa, United States and Europe, they have their headquarters. They send all kinds of programs, and there are over, I don't know, 7, 8, 3, almost over 10 different languages. 不同的那个，在全世界170多个国家，170 countries, they are more or less the media. They just infiltrated into the local media. 还有中国政府在海外买这个大型的这个宣传的东西。For instance, in Times Square, they buy this big board to make their propaganda. 你们知道这个多少钱吗？1秒鐘是1秒鐘是70美金。It cost one second, $70 US, but they send half an hour, a whole film on China to make propaganda. How many money they spend for that? So they try to grab the discourse power, 争夺话语权在国际上。就不得了的事情。还有在德国，比如说在 Thalia This Network， 就是卖书的。You can see 习近平的治国大纲就放在那个 Berlin on the main street. This is incredible， 不像话。这个西方人有的时候这么那个。好 ，That's all what I want to say. I'm sorry, but well, I just cut short. 谢谢。
So we still have 5 minutes, and Didi asked me if she could contribute again in respect to foreign media, for media in foreign countries, and from Chinese point of view.
Danke, Sabine. I spent 14 years as a journalist in China. First for the South China Morning Post, which was my hometown newspaper, and then for the New York Times. And, you know, it's my opinion that non-Chinese, you know, we have a terrible problem understanding China. Foreign media are not, by and large, doing a good job at all. And so even those who think they are doing a good job or who are doing a partly good job are really so far from actually understanding in a really accurate, honest, you know, organic way, the actual real dynamics of what's happening in that society, that we just have an absolute, like a pretty catastrophic media landscape among foreign media and how they report on China. And I just wanted to give one example from my own experience, which was at the end of 2013, the Chinese government made an announcement that from now on they would not use the organs of death row prisoners in China for transplant. So this was like an announcement that came from state media. It was short, and many major Western media, I don't name any names, simply said, oh, the Chinese government says it is no longer going to use organs from prisoners from death row, full stop. Isn't, you know, subtext, isn't that great? And there was no context, there was no questioning, there was no investigation. And I can tell you for a fact that foreign media just don't want to deal with this subject. And so I then actually did pick it up later on and had quite some difficult times trying to examine this issue because, you know, they really don't want to deal with it. And I think that when you get major foreign media uncritically presenting the, you know, 新华社 or whatever, 官方媒体 version on such ultra important, sensitive humanitarian issues, you know, well, you know, then we have an even bigger problem than whatever the Chinese government is doing in this area. We've got a global problem. So that's not a very nice thought, not a very jolly thought, not a very optimistic thought, but I think it's true. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And I think we do have to keep in mind that nowadays foreign media cannot work freely in China. That's a very, very important point. Yeah, I know many correspondents who complain that they are always watched, that they cannot have interviews or spontaneous interviews or vox pop, people on the street, asking people on the street or so. It is just not possible to report on China independently. It's too controlled, and many renowned journalists from the New York Times and from other media, Washington Post, have been thrown out of China. We all know this already. Okay, so I think we clear.
Yeah. The real problem is journalists in China are cut off from information. Leading to the inner circle, you know, I was
Ganz kurz.
Yeah.
This is impossible now. And there is also the mistrust of Chinese people to talk to foreigners, to foreign journalists in particular, because they are afraid what happens afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, when were you there?
I was there in the early 90s.
Yeah, a friend of mine said that you used to be able to find out what was going on in Chinese politics from maybe around two corners in the early days, in the 80s, 90s, etc. But as China grew richer, you know, more money at stake, people could be punished by having the money withdrawn. If you leak anything, you'll be punished by financially. It became harder and harder as China grew richer. And in fact, we know when I was there, I mean, there were countless episodes. A colleague of mine was kidnapped because of a story I was working on. So the whole thing is just pretty horrendous, actually. Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry, but we have to finish. Okay, so maybe.
Because we have to switch the.
Yeah, we have to switch the technique. Yeah. I'm really sorry we cannot continue the discussion because it's really important. But we have to switch because of technical reasons and clear the panel, the desk.